Campaign for Liberty, Baltimore County, presents Dr. Thomas DiLorenzo as keynote speaker.
There was a great press conference of Rand Paul on TV mocking Obama, saying that he was sort of shouting, "Pass this bill." He had his own bill that he wanted to pass. But, this bill, too, is designed, let's see, this is 2011, 2012 is the campaign, is an election year. It's also designed to fire up the teachers' unions and the construction unions and the big city mayors, like the mayor of Baltimore. That there's a meritorious person, isn't it, to give $1 billion to or $10 billion to, and so I mean that's maybe this is not a lot of news to you, but I think if you get in debates or discussions of this, FDR did not end the Great Depression, all his spending. World War II did not end the Great Depression. Not only that, it was the drastic 2/3 reduction in government spending from 45 to 47 that actually caused the recovery from the Great Depression. And another point I would make about this, and I talk about this in my book on capitalism that I seem to have a copy over there, is that the 1932. 33, Hoover, the last couple of years of Hoover and Roosevelt, was the first time in American history that any presidents responded to an economic recession, deep recession or depression, with massive government intervention. Previous to that, the approach was, we've gone too far, we need to cut taxes, we need to cut spending, we need to have free trade, we need to deregulate. That was always the approach for 150 years. Prior to this time. So the first time ever that the approach to a recession was massive government intervention, we had a depression from 1929 until 1946. And to this day, the court historians, the people who are the sort of the intellectual support system of the state, lie about it and claim that it all worked fine. When it didn't. And it's just simple economics. It ought to be self-evident to any normal person, I would think. I mean, if government spending can create prosperity, there shouldn't be a single unemployed person in America. They've borrowed $5 trillion in the past 3 years and spent it all on domestic programs, and the unemployment rate is still right where it was 3 years ago, pretty much. And so it doesn't work. But like I said, there's such a chorus of BS that comes out of the television, the radio, the newspapers, the Baltimore Sun, universities. Yeah, look at these morons that are protesting on Wall Street. These young kids. I see them all the time. They're sort of the ridiculous thing is they're saying just what their professors taught them in school, which is, I suppose, is why they're all unemployed today. There might be another book in this for me but there really has been an infantilization of college students going on for a couple of decades now. Rather than educating them and teaching them to think clearly, they're taught platitudes like this. For example, one of my colleagues at Loyola taught a class on government and the economy. And he told me recently that one of his students gave a talk on the economy during the Reagan years, which was pretty good. And a young lady in his class broke down in uncontrollable crying. She couldn't handle it because she had been taught all her life that Ronald Reagan was the most evil person in the history of the planet, far worse than Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin, right? Like that. And here's some guy saying, prosperity, 200,000 jobs a month created for long periods of time, and she just couldn't handle it. She cried, which is pathetic because she was totally incapable of even asking the guy a question about this. And this was a 21-year-old who had been through 4 years of college. And so that's what I mean when I talk about the infantilization of college students, and it's on display on television right now with these protests. If you've seen any of the interviews for these people, it's pretty pathetic. But they sound just like some of my faculty colleagues at Loyola, or even the president of Loyola kind of talks like that from time to time. And so all the time, in fact. Keynesian. And so that's about what I had to say.
And the Austrian two different schools.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about Keynes.
Yeah.
The name
Yeah.
Keynesian comes from his name.
Yeah, Keynes, Keynes. Yeah, the Austrian School of Economics is actually about economics. Yeah, that's the big difference. That's the big difference. No, I'm serious. You can read the whole this general theory, and you'll be hard pressed to find the word prices and money in that book. You will, and so it was sort of an attack on economics, because economists for hundreds of years have been sort of the skunks at the garden party with regard to economic policy, because politicians are always wanting to say they can give us something for nothing. They can spend money and make us rich. They can pass a law and end poverty. They can pass a minimum wage law and end poverty. They can reduce the price of gas with price controls, with no side effects, no shortage or anything like that. And economists always point out the foolishness of this. So we're always sort of the skunks at the garden party. But then there are some of the economists and non-economists figured out that you can make a lot of money. You can become very prominent. You can be on television all the time if you think up creative lies to say, no, this will work. Yeah, this will work. Yeah, the government can wave a magic wand and make us all wealthy. Sure. And Murray Rothbard explains this historically. This has been true for thousands of years. Maybe 1,000 years ago, it was the church that provided a rationale for the government. The way it started out was it was called the divine right of kings. And the way that started out, though, was that the king was never supposed to do anything that was not in Scripture. And if he did anything that was not, according to the Bible, he was not supposed to do it. But then that was transformed by the intellectuals of the day, who were mostly monks, who were somehow on the payroll of the king, apparently, to mean whatever the king did is God's will. So it turned into whatever the king does is God's will. And so that was 1,000 years ago. But today you have the Paul Krugmans and the Joseph Stiglitz and people like that claim to be economists, but they're pretty much excuse makers for the state. They're socialists, basically, and not really economists. So Keynes was one of those. Keynes, the German edition of his famous book, the last chapter, he said, admittedly, my system will work best in a totalitarian society. He actually said that in a German edition in his book. And it was translated into English, too, and I used to have it on my office door. And one of my faculty colleagues ripped it off, of course, because he'd been teaching this stuff for 30 years. And didn't like it too much. I guess if you want me to have questions, that's fine.
I'd like to share an anecdote with everyone. My first year when I was in college, my first economics class, first thing we were told was, they asked the question, why don't we have commodity money? In other words, why don't we have money that's backed by some kind of commodity? And the answer, this is what we were expecting to learn, just sort of accepted at face value. The answer was, that would limit the government's ability to print money, and we can't have that.
Yeah. When I was a college student taking economics, we learned about all the debates over the Fed. There was 30 some years ago. You learned about the debates over the Fed. Milton Friedman was a famous critic of the Fed, but today it's changed now. That it's sort of you're not supposed to criticize the Fed. You're supposed to call Alan Greenspan the maestro. And where's he been, by the way, Greenspan? I used to think he must, for years I thought he must have been hiding in the same cave as bin Laden somewhere, because no one had seen either of them.
He says it's not gold. Gold's not money. The gold's not money, right?
Yeah.
He said so.
Yeah. One of my talks that I gave for the Mises Institute was entitled "How the Mainstream Miseducates About Money and the Fed," and I quoted Bernanke's textbook. And one of the quotes was, in one sentence, he says, the Fed is completely independent of politics. And then the next sentence, it says the chairman of the Fed is appointed by the president. The next sentence. And so, that's the. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what you said that in the Middle World War II, the budget was like $90 billion. What would that be in today's inflation-adjusted dollars across the United States?
The price level is like about 20 times more than it was when the Fed was created in 1913. So if you fast forward 20 years, we didn't have much inflation, price inflation during that time. So, multiply by 15, between 15 and 20, call it 20 even, because I don't think there wasn't that much price inflation during the Great Depression. There's a little bit on there. So
We could also take the current gold price, divide by 35, and then apply that to the amount of government spending back then, and that would give you some idea based upon the gold value.
Yeah, well, but then government, just government spending is not a good measure of what government does, because, if the government can hire an Air Force mechanic, or it can hire an EPA bureaucrat who can shut down an entire corporation with a regulation. So it's not always just how much government spends that is the best measure of what government does, as far as that goes. The Air Force mechanic is pretty superfluous, but the EPA bureaucrat can be insidious and awful. And like the people who are shutting down the farms that you were talking about, that's that's where we need the unemployment right there. Right? No, not all the factory workers and the home builders and all that. But, yes, sir.
I always hate to admit when I'm not following something, but I wanted to get a little additional explanation on the end of the Depression period of time, the economic rebound. Go ahead. I understood that it comes from government spending. I was under, again, the false impression that it really was sort of based on wartime manufacturing and so forth that ramped up to support the war effort.
No.
And what I gathered, yes. But you were saying that it was a result, the end of things sort of was as a result of the major decrease in government spending. What's the cause and effect there? I just wanted a little more explanation.
Well, that $65 billion was put back into the pockets of taxpayers, for one thing. Yeah. Well,
They're selling more money like a MoFo, taking money out of the private sector.
it's not just the spending. I mean, it's the government control of resources. I mean, when you order an automobile factory to quit making cars and start making tanks, and they get the tanks, and what did they do at the end of World War II? They shoved them off cliffs and blew them up and things like that. Wartime spending is destructive of the economy because all that capital that would have been spent on productive things that human beings actually want are spent instead to cause explosions and destruction somewhere. And then when they're done with that capital, they don't just continue to use it until it depreciates. They literally threw it into the ocean or blew it up or something like that. That all stopped. And so the capital investment, which is the prerequisite for economic growth, capital investment, returned to normal. It got away from being totally dominated by bombers and tanks and ships to things that you and I would actually value, like food, clothing, and shelter. And so there was a big transformation from the wartime economy. And war doesn't create prosperity any more than earthquakes do because of the opportunity cost involved.